My name is Makinie, and I'm the president and founder of Deconstructing the mental health system. I've worked in mental health since 2012, and the process of becoming a licensed marriage and family therapist and maintaining my license is part of what motivated me to start this 501c3 nonprofit. I've worked as an outpatient counselor, in-home counselor, partnered with DCF, as a case manager in community mental health, in social services with DSHS, as a vocational counselor with DVR, and now as advisor and counselor with Renton Technical College within the Community Technical College system of Washington State. And I run down this list to tell you that I've experienced and witnessed a lot of wonderful, amazing things, as well as significant flaws in the mental health system that has and can do a lot of damage to clients who are Black, Indigenous, or people of color. I'll start by telling you that my internship was unpaid. As a young Black woman trying to find my way in an unfamiliar state, I'm from Miami and I was studying in Connecticut, I found it very difficult to try and balance managing a full course load in graduate school, working 30 hours in an internship that was also unpaid. And since I also did some of the billing, I saw just how much the organization made per client hour. And while I did benefit as far as getting client hours, it didn't really help as far as managing my life. The other thing that I noticed was mental status exams, and I'm talking about across different jobs that I've done. Mental status exams and chart notes written with a lack of cultural competence, and also written from implicit bias. And when these chart notes are exchanged with partner agencies, clinicians from the agency receiving the chart notes will often review them prior to meeting a client. And this can affect the first impression before the client even walks through the door. I'll give some examples. I was once asked if I wanted to call security before seeing a client who identified as Black, based on the chart notes alone. Had not met with them yet. Of course, I refused, and this person turned out to have some very valid concerns regarding misdiagnosis, wrong psychiatric medication prescription, and a long history of mistreatment from law enforcement. Of course, this was all misinterpreted by previous clinicians, and this person was labeled as problematic, paranoid, and angry. In fact, the word angry was used repeatedly throughout the chart notes. I'll give another example of how a lack of cultural competence does affect working with communities of color, but specifically Black communities. One time I was asked to call DCF on a family because their hair was unkept. And what this person meant was that their hair seemed to be in a bunch of knots. And so I had to pause and explain natural locks to them, something that is, very relatively common in the Caribbean, but also in Florida. And I found it very unfortunate, and I was also concerned at how many previous calls had been made before I actually sat them down to have this conversation with them and provide some psychoeducation to build their cultural competence to prevent them from doing this in the future. So this lack of cultural competence and insight into racial trauma leads to families being separated, leads to misdiagnosis, and inevitably a mistrust between communities of color and mental health providers and agencies. I've also witnessed and experienced secondary trauma and caregiver burnout by being in workplaces that were underfunded, which resulted in many of us being underpaid, but still expected to carry caseloads anywhere from 40 to 60 clients. And the result is that turnover was very high. Organizations like these also recruit recently graduated clinicians who lack experience, but these same clinicians are expected to be able to handle comorbidity, severe mental health diagnosis while being underpaid. Of course, that leads to burnout. It's a disservice to recent graduates, but more so for clients who deserve better. Clients deserve dedicated, well-paid, educated, and experienced clinicians who can manage secondary trauma, manage the caregiver burnout, and remain engaged and dedicated long-term. It's just that it's almost impossible when the system is designed in a way that clinicians are unpaid and turnover is high. You might have also noticed that I wrote all white/male board of directors, and perhaps this piqued your interest or made you feel concerned, in which case I'll ask you to turn within for a minute and ask yourself what part of you felt concerned by that. And I'll also ask, what have you noticed when white men make decisions for women and children and BIPOC communities? It's not to say that these boards of directors are not well-intentioned, intelligent, and compassionate people, but to say that they could not possibly understand directly the needs of communities that they serve without the input of members of these communities. But the problem is, more often than not, that doesn't happen. And communities are often left neglected, misdiagnosed, and prescribed with the wrong medications and so forth. Another thing I've seen is clinician salaries. And as I described before, most clinicians when starting out are underpaid. I was paid around $35,000 when I was starting, and I got up to $40,000. I'm actually lowballing it when I say that the average clinician salary is $50,000. And I'm talking about master's level clinicians. Meanwhile, student loan debt is anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000. And that brings me to my next point, which is the cost of our trade. And I wrote this breakdown of various costs associated with becoming a licensed marriage and family therapist, but the numbers are similar for social workers, mental health counselors, and other clinical designations. All in all, becoming licensed and maintaining a license is expensive, and these hoops are founded in systemic racism and classism, in the sense that you can have all of the potential and intelligence in the world, but if you cannot afford to pay each required step, you'll be disqualified from the race. And how is this racist? How does this impact race? Well, you only need to walk into a mental health clinic or continuing education training to see what I'm talking about. These are predominantly managed by white men, and most clinicians are white women. Most clinicians are around middle class as well. So class and race do intersect in mental health, and this does not benefit the Black community, Indigenous community, or communities of color. I've been doing a lot of educating, intervening, remedying, and healing in mental health for 9 years on an individual level. But after witnessing the murder of George Floyd in 2020, I was hurt, angry, and wanted to begin taking action to educate and heal on a larger scale. I started seeing articles from white clinicians pop up about how they tried to help Black communities, but they were inexperienced, and they talked about where they failed as a means to begin atoning for their complicit participation in harming Black communities. I also saw white-led initiatives started to begin changing the mental health system. And while all of these were well-intentioned, they were missing something. Black, Indigenous, and people of color giving input and expertise and feedback on the harm that's been done and how to improve it. I started reaching out to counselors and clinicians to see if anyone was interested in forming a group, and we had our first meeting on Juneteenth, 2020. Originally, we called it Dismantling the Mental Health System, but the definition of dismantle is to take the machine or structure to pieces. And I felt like it was inaccurate, as the goal was to educate, modify, and improve the existing mental health system. Decolonizing also fit in a sense that we intend to actively seek to get more Black, Indigenous, and people of color to lead initiatives and to be elevated to decision-making positions, as well as to address some of the financial flaws that lead to a lack of BIPOC clinicians. But inevitably, we went with deconstruct, which means to analyze in order to expose hidden internal assumptions and contradictions and subvert its apparent significance or unity. Because our intention first and foremost is to boost the visibility of Black, Indigenous, and people of color clinicians and educate by means of speaking the truth about the mental health system in order to improve it. We also put meetings on hold because we decided that we wanted to be more organized. And so we decided to postpone until launching this nonprofit, but also receiving 501c3 status, which we have recently, and I am very excited about. This is our logo, which I designed and I am incredibly proud of. I wanted to create something that made it clear that this was a Black female-led organization. So hopefully as you're looking at it, that is what you're getting from it. DMHS is a group for mental health professionals who want to actively increase access to mental health services for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, assist Black, Indigenous, and people of color healers in obtaining and maintaining mental health licenses by navigating the bureaucracy and costs, and work to have Black, Indigenous, and people of color culturally competent diagnoses acknowledged so Black, Indigenous, and people of color receive appropriate treatment, diagnosis, and even medication without the interference of implicit bias. Our mission, DMHS will significantly improve Black, Indigenous, and people of color's lives through addressing the current mental health system through educational, economic, social justice, and holistic anti-racist efforts. We also have a Facebook group of those working in healing and mental health professions. And I say healing because to me, mental health is more than having a license. There is more than one way to help a person. So while not everyone is licensed and not everyone works directly in mental health, most people in the group have served communities of color, specialize in working with communities of color, and are forward thinking with regards to changing the mental health system. The other thing I want to say is that if you specialize in accounting, WordPress, or grant writing, you are encouraged to reach out to us at dmhs@dmhsus.org. I am doing most of this myself, and I'm not a specialist in any of these things, but I'm trying my best. And so if you specialize in this, we definitely want to hear from you. Please consider donating to us at paypal.me/DMHSUS. Thank you so much for taking time to learn about our nonprofit, Deconstructing the Mental Health System, Inc. It is a 501c3. I hope you'll consider following us on social media, spreading the word, or donating to our cause. Thank you again. Take care.